Welcome to Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. I'm your co-host Russ.
And I'm your co-host Mike.
This week, it's episode 180.
Oh, we're getting close to that big 200. Coming in 2025, I think.
Should be coming in the early part of the year. Podbean will give us a new badge for that.
Oh, cool.
200 episodes. So.
Yeah, I'm running out of place on my lapel for the other badges that we have, you know?
Yeah.
We're starting to look like South American dictators with all these badges.
We need mustaches, I think.
Yeah. I might grow one just for the occasion, you know, just to the 200th episode.
Take some new photos and get a new look for the podcast. Anyway, this week we want to start out with a bunch of thanks from last episode. First of all, thanks to Glossa, the classical music label, for sharing our episode from last week. Be sure to check out La Ritarata's recording of Boccherini Fandango string quintets on Glossa.
Yeah, we like that. Thank you, Glossa. That was a great sounding recording. I really enjoyed the sound of it.
Also, thanks to saxophonist Elias Haslanger for sharing our episode. We really enjoyed his recording. Elias Haslanger meets Mike Saylor's saxophone and trumpet combo there. Really enjoyable jazz recording. And a big thanks to Origin Records for sharing our episode and their kind words about our podcast.
Yeah,
Mike,
thanks.
They said, our in-depth music reviews are always interesting and enlightening.
Fantastic. So people out there, I don't know how we can reach them and enlighten them, but we need to enlighten people that we even exist.
Yeah, that's the hardest part.
But I'm glad that these labels are picking up on that. It's really wonderful. Thanks a lot for the kind words.
Yeah, that means a lot. Coming from a great label like Origin, and I'm sure that we'll be featuring a lot more great recordings from their label and the OA2 label as well. Actually, I've got one for next week, so stay tuned to the end of this episode and you'll find out what that is. And I want to say hello to trombonist Alton Senkalar.
Oh.
Hi, Alton. Hope you're listening to this episode. You know, the only place we can see who listens to us on the podcast is if someone signs up on our host site, Podbean.
Yeah.
And if they use their real name, we'll see that they follow us. And I noticed that Alton followed us there this week.
Cool.
And he recently also posted on his Facebook page, because we follow each other there, about becoming a jazz artist in residence at Missouri State University Jazz Studies. So congratulations on that, Alton.
Congratulations.
And to all our listeners, be sure to check out Alton Senkalar's recordings. We featured them on the podcast In Good Standing from 2023 and Discover the Present. That's from March of this year, both on Positone Records, one of our favorite jazz labels. Alton is a fabulous trombonist, and I'm sure you'll enjoy those recordings. All right, we've got a little bit of bad news this week, Mike.
This just came in today, didn't it?
It did. We'll have to get over to the piano for our theme. And we have to bid farewell to the great Sergio Mendes.
Yeah, I remember him from the 1970s with Brazil 77, or however you would say that.
Yeah, and before that, Brazil 66,
right?
Oh,
that's right. Yeah, I had those too. We had 8-track tapes of those bands.
Wow, 8 tracks.
8-track
So
tapes.
he was a band leader, pianist, composer, arranger, and songwriter. He died at the age of 83 on September 5th, and he became a pop sensation with his cover of Mas Que Nada in 1966 with his Brazil 66 band. That was on the recording Herb Alpert Presents Sergio Mendes and Brazil 66. Now, Herb Alpert produced that for A&M Records and brought them a lot of fame. Many people will remember and recognize that song. It really sticks in your mind. But they may not know his earlier connection to jazz. So Mendes attended a conservatory in Brazil with hopes of becoming a classical pianist. But as his interest in jazz grew, he started playing in nightclubs in the late 50s, just when bossa nova was getting big in popularity. And he played with Antonio Carlos Jobim and many U.S. jazz musicians who toured Brazil. And Mendes formed the Bossa Rio Sextet of Brazil. And he recorded Cannonball's Bossa Nova on Riverside Records in 1962 with Cannonball Adderley. I've had that recording for years and years, and I remember seeing his name in the credits there. So that's the same year that Stan Getz recorded Jazz Samba with Charlie Bird, and a year before the big bossa nova sensation with Getz Gilberto. So we should remember and be thankful for Sergio Mendes' contribution to the Brazilian infusion into jazz.
Yeah, when I mention 8-track tapes, I always kind of want to say for young people who don't remember what that is. But I think every listener to this podcast is probably old enough to remember what 8-track tapes are and probably had a few back in the day.
Could be. Yeah, they used to have them in cars, too, I remember.
Right. I used to hate the way, like, you'd have a long song, because in the 60s you had a lot of really long songs, and they'd fade the song in the middle so that the 8-track tape could change channels, and then it would fade back in. I used to hate that, yeah.
And you hear a big click, and then it would change over. And an interesting thing, too, before we move on, you found a really interesting picture on Facebook today, right?
I've seen this pop up on the internet several times over the last few years. It's a picture of the crew that built Sergio Mendes' studio in California in the 1970s. And one of those was a very young carpenter by the name of Harrison Ford, went on to become a very famous actor. And there he is.
Right.
Before he was famous. In his youthful days, he worked on Sergio Mendes' studio.
Yeah.
It's a great picture. Seek it out. You can probably even do a search for it on Google. It'll just come up, but it's all over the place.
I remember reading that he had worked as a carpenter before he became, a famous actor, but I had no idea he was connected to something like that. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think people who live in California, they seem to be connected to everybody, especially if you're in the business. You just kind of bump heads with everybody. Ahmet Zappa has a podcast on YouTube. It's a video. And whenever he's talking, he seems to just know everyone from that era. I guess Frank Zappa, his father, knew everybody in Hollywood at the time, too. So they just hobnob with all these really famous people.
California style.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in New York, so didn't meet any of them. There were famous people around, but they were sort of in Manhattan at these exclusive restaurants that I wasn't allowed into. So...
All right, this week we've got 6 new recordings for you, 3 classical and 3 jazz as usual. I think they're all really interesting and enjoyable. So in the episode description, as usual, you can find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music for all of the music that we're going to discuss. And at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer. That's CD quality streaming music from France. You can follow the podcast there as well if you want to get everything in one place. You can listen to adult music on pretty much every podcast platform, but they don't all present the description so neatly or make the links easy to follow. So if you can't see the full description or follow the links easily wherever you're listening to us, you can always come over to our host site. That's Podbean, podbean.com, where everything is easy to read and easy to follow. And if you enjoy the podcast, please follow or subscribe wherever you listen to us. Tell a music-loving friend, tell your musician friends. If you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a short review, that also helps us get listed in the music category recommendations, and that's another way we get new listeners. You can come over and follow us on our Facebook page as well to get extra info and new releases throughout the week. For the past few weeks, I've put up a lot of jazz releases. There's a lot of good music that came out at the end of the summer. You can leave a message or comment there as well. See our interaction with the artists. And if you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We're going to play samples from these recordings as well. And here is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. And we also suggest that if you enjoy the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists. And this week, we're going to start out in classical with an instrument that probably most people have never heard of.
Well, unless you know the Schubert work, the Arpeggione Sonata, then you know the name of it, although that isn't the only name it has, the Arpeggione. And this is an album called Arpeggione, a forgotten instrument, indeed.
Yeah.
It's very forgotten. There are very few works for it, in fact, but it's a pretty interesting instrument. We hear Martin Zeller playing the Arpeggione on this, and he's accompanied by Giorgio Paronuzzi on the forte piano. The forte piano is a very early piano. It has hammered strings as opposed to the harpsichord, which has plucked strings. So this is one of the earliest versions of the piano, basically. And it's got a lighter sound, as you'll hear. And Victor Castillo Luna on the guitar. This is more of a Baroque guitar. This is on the Prospero classical label, and I would like to thank them for sending me a booklet for this so that we could just break down exactly what was happening on this album.
Yeah.
Okay. They're a Swiss label, and you can visit their website. They have a website and check out their releases. We've already talked about a few of them, and this is the latest one we have. Now, I've been sitting on this recording for a while. This came out on July 5th, and I think there's a CD of it now that came out about a month later. But I wanted to get this in before summer ended. We're kind of seasonal. I feel like I don't want to do, summer releases once we're in autumn, which is coming up really fast. Anyway, let's talk first about the album cover. It's really nice. It kind of has a photo of the musicians, sort of in this maybe Belle Epoque kind of setting. It's their clothes, and they're having a picnic, and it kind of reminded me of the Manet painting, Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe, or Luncheon on the Grass, but without the naked woman who just happens to be sitting around
missing a crucial element there,
fully dressed men. But it's a really famous painting. By the way, there's a really good book on just that one painting. Some guy a French writer wrote the whole, I should give you the whole information. I've got it somewhere, but not available at the moment. I don't know if it's been translated to English anyway, but there is a book only on that one painting. Anyway, the Arpeggione, what is this? It's a hybrid instrument, a cross between a guitar and a cello. Think about that. Now, there are other hybrid instruments. We know the saxophone is a hybrid instrument. It's a reed and a sort of brass instrument. So which one is it? It's kind of sounds a little like both. Anyway, the Arpeggione is a cross between a guitar and cello, as I said. It has 6 strings that are tuned like a guitar, but it's played with a bow like the cello.
Yeah.
So if you think Jimmy Page was a genius for bowing his electric guitar in Led Zeppelin, think again. He probably just knew his history.
The other thing you have to envision, though, is you can't really bow a guitar because the strings are flat on the bridge.
Yeah.
So this has a curved bridge.
That's right, so that you can bow the individual strings.
Right.
That's right. It was made like this on purpose, but I'm just throwing that in there just for fun. Anyway, the Arpeggione apparently has an enormous range, larger than the cello. Apparently. I don't know how that could be. But anyway, that's what
6 strings, I guess.
Yeah, 6 strings, I guess. You would have a much wider range, I guess, than the cello would. Anyway, the name Arpeggione only appears in the titles of Schubert's works, and that's why it's called that today. But his contemporaries, Schubert's contemporaries, that is, called the instrument Gitarre d'amour. So you think of the oboe d'amour and things like that. So this is the guitar d'amour, the Bogen guitar, or the sentiment guitar. Hey, I'm going to play you my new composition on my sentiment guitar. And the ladies would go, ooh, can't wait.
Maybe they'd come to your picnic then.
Yeah, they'd come to my picnic. Maybe that's what's happening in that Matisse painting.
Could be.
They just heard an Arpeggione. Anyway, Schubert focuses primarily on the instrument's vocal qualities. The forte piano used on this recording, this needs to be talked about because the cover doesn't show us the forte piano that we're hearing. The forte piano used on this recording is a proper piano-like instrument built by Mirko Weiss after an 1815 model by the Viennese maker Johann Fritz. And you can see it being used in the studio photo in the booklet. So you'd have to download the booklet or buy the CD, open it, or scroll down a bit, and you'll see that forte piano being played with the Arpeggione accompanying the Arpeggione. But all the other photos in the booklet, and there are several of them, and they're all really kind of fun, interesting photos, and as the album cover photo, are of a fascinating keyboard instrument called an orfica. There are historical drawings of it in the booklet as well as a photo on the cover, and the instrument pictured was invented by Carl Leopold Rühlig in 1795. It's worn with a strap around your neck like a guitar and recalls those synthesizers that musicians in the 80s used to wear around their necks, like Jean-Michel Jarre. They called that instrument the keytar, as opposed to the guitar, the keytar.
And this is like a picnic piano here.
Kind of looks like a little picnic piano. I remember Thomas Dolby had one of these too. And I think Herbie Hancock on Future Shock had one too. Yeah. I actually looked on Wikipedia and there was just a long list of people who played this instrument. A lot of them jazz musicians, but back in the 70s, that was the fusion era. Anyway, many others played it at some point. I like looking at the instrument, but I have to say, I find it annoying that the orfica is pictured throughout the booklet, but is not used on the album. I saw the picture of it. I was like, wow, I wonder what this sounds like. It was a new instrument to me. I thought the photo, though, really interesting, were misleading, to be honest. Okay, also, the builder and origin of the instrument are not given. We don't know where this instrument came from. All we get is a thank you on the last page to Georg Sen for his willingness to take an Orphica from the Salon de Piano for a walk. So they probably just borrowed this for the,
Right.
the photo shoot. But I feel like it's interesting, but it's a misleading photo shoot. I mean, seeing the instrument made me want to hear it. Now, obviously, if you look at the picture, its range is too small to handle these Schubert sonatas, and I bet it's really quiet as well. It looks tiny.
Yeah.
It's probably even quieter than a clavichord. But couldn't we have heard it on at least one brief track? I don't know. To be honest, no, we probably couldn't, because this is a really good album, and it sounds fantastic. And that probably would have ruined the aesthetic of the album. But still, just the fact that they brought it out made me curious. Anyway, I do love the photos, but I just felt it was misleading. Anyway, it's just as well in the end. The star of this show is the Arpeggione, and we get to hear it for the length of the album. The recording presents 95% of the surviving original complete works for Arpeggione.
All in one recording.
95%. Now, that's minus the Schubert violin sonatas, I think. Unless he wrote or Arpeggione on the score, but it just says violin sonata. These are arranged by a Martin Zeller. So I'm guessing that the 95% of the works are the Schubert Arpeggione, and then the two, the Romberg and Spohr works that I'll talk about. So tracks 1 through 5 are 90% of the works written for this instrument. This poor instrument just didn't get any attention. Let's bring it out of retirement for an evening, shall we? Anyway, tracks 1 through 3, Franz Schubert Sonata in A minor for Arpeggione and forte piano. I think D is Deutsch here, 821 from 1824. Now, we've heard this piece. It's very famous. It's usually played by the cello, and it's very difficult to play on the cello. The cello has only 4 strings, so the cellist has to make a lot of adjustments in order to play this work. I know there's a famous recording of it by Rostropovich with Benjamin Britten at the piano. It's really fantastic. Cellists play this also because Schubert never wrote a cello sonata. What a loss that is for them, because this would have been a great cello sonata if he had arranged it that way. For Martin Zeller, the Arpeggione brings out the tender, inward, and lyrical qualities of the music in this piece that the cello just can't. He says the sonata sounds less operatic and more honest on the original instrument. I would agree with that. Because the cello projects, and the Arpeggione really does not, so you don't have this sort of voice from the stage, like reaching the back of the room with no microphones, you know. The Arpeggione is a bit quieter and more intimate than the cello or an opera singer. He goes on to say that the Arpeggione needs to be paired with a historical piano so that the right balance is achieved. And here, Giorgio Paronuzzi uses a forte piano after Johann Fritz. Well, it's modeled after a Vienna 1815 model, okay? But it's a more recent instrument, because it blends perfectly with the Arpeggione. And I have to say, after hearing this, I have to agree. Okay, so I've built up everybody's expectations. Am I going to deliver the goods with this? You bet I am. This is a really great sounding recording. Let's start with the Allegro Moderato. The forte piano rings out like a mellow, early piano. Hammers hitting strings, a little rattle on certain notes. I really love this. This is the sort of thing, this kind of roughness kind of got me into, period instrument Baroque in the first place. I find it charming. The Arpeggione is really closer to a viola da gamba in sound than a cello. It's nasal in quality very often, but doesn't resonate as much as a viola da gamba. Viola da gamba has like a wide sort of harmonic to it, and this does not. The Arpeggione has a quiet sound. So let's hear the opening of this famous piece with its timbres, unfamiliar to our ears. Here we go. You ready, listeners? The Arpeggione Sonata by Schubert. And we get up to the quicker part there. So that's the way the instrument sounds. The playing is lyrical, deeply satisfying, and I'm really engaged by 1 minute and 37 seconds when a transitional theme to the more energetic, cheerful theme at 2 minutes and 17 seconds is heard. The put-together sound of both instruments has a nice flow to it. The Arpeggione has a comforting, diffused warmth to it. At around the 3-minute mark, the exposition repeats, and at 6 minutes and 27 seconds, the development starts with an arpeggio on the forte piano, and the plucked sound of the Arpeggione here is lovely, and I want to sample that too, so we get another example of what this instrument actually sounds like. Want to get some of that more athletic playing in there too. So you can hear when the instrument is plucked, it does kind of have a bit of a guitar quality to it. I mean, not quite, but it has some character. Anyway, at the 8 minute and 37 mark, we get a ponderous line from the cello in its lower end, which is only lightly resonant, but appealing nonetheless. After this, the recapitulation returns with the themes played at a slower tempo, but finally regaining their speed as the section goes on. We hear a lot of false cadences in the exposition, and they're used to great effect here to thwart the ending of the movement and lead us into a trudging coda, bringing us to an arpeggiated cadence. Clever writing by Schubert there, and the musicians pick up on it all and put it across extremely well. Track 2, the Adagio. The piano starts this out as accompaniment to a salon song, and the Arpeggione sings the melody. The instrument is probably at its best when it's singing a melody, so let's hear this. Now, I had mentioned that the instrument has a bit of a nasal quality to it. That's because there's no vibrato being used. Now, I'm used to hearing this work played on the cello, and cellists put a lot of vibrato in. It's more like a sung tone. We're not getting that here. We're used to that from period instruments, though. Vibrato probably wasn't used in this era. Anyway, the movement is about song length as well. It's only 3 minutes long after the 12-minute first movement. The long sustained tones are bowed out of the instrument, and no vibrato, of course. There's a slow, ponderous middle section with repeated quarter notes on the piano accompanying. Then we get to the third and final movement, the Allegretto. This movement is connected to the previous one and has a folk song quality to it. It's very appealing, so let's sample the theme, which I'm going to have to fade up. And there's your theme. The second part of it repeats there. It's taken at a slowish pace, allowing the melody to be shaped by Zeller and land comfortably. I like the tempo they took here. Just after 1 minute and 20 seconds, the more folk dance-like theme is heard. with the Arpeggione making an appealing, coarse sound on the low strings. Let's hear that too. I like the throatiness of the very low bass note that is being caught during that figure. Just after the third minute, there's a third highly appealing folk theme, and Schubert just had a bottomless supply of these. This leads to a cadence. The movement proceeds as a series of folk dances, one more appealing than the previous. The more dance-oriented rhythms are pushed via slight accelerandi to quicker tempos. All themes in this movement are appealing and refreshing. It's no wonder this is a popular work, and the Arpeggione draws a sweeter quality from it than I've previously heard. The performance here is excellent. The final chords are played via a pizzicato arpeggio. Again, warm and appealing. Okay, and we get to the latter half of the 95% of works originally arranged or written for the Arpeggione. Bernard Romberg's Adagio from his cello concerto in A major, opus 3. All right, now you're saying to yourself, well, it's a cello concerto. How is this for the Arpeggione? Well, this was arranged by Vinzenz Schuster from his Anleitung zur Erlernung des von Herrn Georg Stauffer neu erfunden Gitarre-Violoncells. I hope I said most of that right. It means instructions for learning Mr. George Stauffer's newly invented guitar violoncello, which was possibly published in 1825, according to IMSLP, though the booklet note doesn't say. The booklet notes go into more detail about the instrument's invention. Schuster, by the way, gave the premiere of Schubert's Arpeggione Sonata. Not only did he sort of collect these works here and arrange them, but he gave the premiere performance of the Arpeggione Sonata by Schubert. He may very well have been the world's only professional player of the Arpeggione. This arrangement features the guitar accompanying the Arpeggione, and the combination of these two instruments is really beautiful, so I'd like to sample this. Zeller given a lot of space to express with the instrument via the really soft and gentle approach of the guitarist Victor Castillo Luna. We're not going to hear too much of him on this album, so I wanted to make sure I mentioned his name again. This is a straightforward song-oriented adagio melody, and the gentle guitar sort of gives the impression of someone serenading their love from under the window. There's some lovely harmonics on the guitar at about 1 minute and 45 seconds, played rallentando to end a phrase. This is a lovely interpretation by both musicians. Track 5, Louis Spohr, Polacca from the opera Faust, again arranged by Vinzenz Schuster, the arpeggionist who wrote that book on how to play the instrument. This is a familiar work to me, or at least its rhythm is. Let's sample it, and maybe you'll recognize it too. Now, I don't know Louis Spohr's opera Faust, but I think this work has been arranged for an encore piece. And once again, we hear the lovely guitar playing of Victor Castillo Luna accompanying the Arpeggione here. Incredibly, we've had nothing but instantly memorable melodies on this album so far. Here too. The B section has a more yearning sort of melody. The A section returns in all of its light cheer afterwards. The Arpeggione does song-like melody extremely well. It has an easy way with cantabile, apparently. Okay, the rest of the album are all works that are arranged by the arpeggionist on this album, Martin Zeller. So first, tracks 6 through 8, we have Schubert's Sonata Number 1 in D major for pianoforte and violin, here played by Arpeggione and what is now known as the forte piano. This is his Deutsch 384. It starts out Allegro moderato, first movement, track 6. It starts as a unison melody with Arpeggione and piano. You can hear the melody is given a heavier feel than it wants to have with the Arpeggione, because this is originally a piece for the violin, which is a much lighter instrument. Zeller surprisingly goes up into a high range at the end of his first phrase, sounding a bit like a violin when he does it. There's a pretty second theme featuring the Arpeggione playing pizzicato, and I like to hear the high range of the instrument and the pizzicato, so I'm going to try to cram them both into this one sample. You got to think that pizzicato quality wouldn't come across the same way on the violin. It's really special here. The pizzicati actually make the instrument sound a bit like a guitar here. It sounds versatile, and the movement is a brief 5 minutes and has a very brief development section, followed by a recapitulation of the opening material, which works out the key so that the second pizzicato theme sounds natural in the tonic key of D major. Track 7, the second movement, Adagio. The piano has most of the opening theme in this, sounding like something Haydn or Mozart would come up with. So it's like something from the classical era, very traditional sounding. The Arpeggione then plays the theme in short bow strokes, then gets its own more legato melody in the first minute. It's a brief song-like movement, very appealing. Track 8, Allegretto. This is the third and final movement of this sonata. The rhythm dances along from the beginning and continues with some appealing picked accompaniment on the Arpeggione as though it's a guitar. And let me sample a bit of this. The movement proceeds like a straightforward rondo, with the dancing opening theme returning. The intervening episodes don't lose any appeal either. Schubert's gift for melody is heard throughout this brief but youthful work. The Arpeggione works particularly well in this movement, especially with the creative, tasteful arranging of Martin Zeller. Tracks 9 through 12, Schubert's Sonata Number 3 in G minor for pianoforte and violin, Deutsche 408, and this is, of course, arranged for Arpeggione by Zeller himself. Track 9, Allegro giusto. This is a pretty brief sonata movement. As in the previous sonata, it's only 5 minutes long. It has a heavier, Beethoven-like quality to it, with the forte piano propelling the rushing rhythm in the second theme via arpeggiated figures, which the Arpeggione picks up when the forte piano has the lead. Let's hear this. Zeller plays high up on the Arpeggione, close to but just beneath the violin's range. Track 10 is the Andante, and this song-like second movement starts with the piano and Arpeggione playing the theme together. The Arpeggione again gets a chance to show off its lyrical qualities when it gets the melody. There are some very pretty moments, especially when the Arpeggione is accompanying pizzicato. Again, Zeller shows a lot of taste in his arrangement, as well as understanding of the instrument's charms. Track 11, the third movement, is a menuetto. This has an aggressive opening with a gentle plucked follow-up in the Arpeggione, sounding guitar-like and very pretty. Let's hear the opening of this movement. And we get a repeat, as is normal in a menuetto. The trio section is song-like and lyrical in the Arpeggione, who's center stage for this section. This is a straightforward minuet movement with the minuet repeated after the trio. And then finally, track 12, the fourth and final movement, Allegro moderato. The finale is slower than you'd expect from Schubert, though tempos on this and throughout the program sound ideally taken. The music flows beautifully. This again is a rondo, with I think the intervening sections being oddly more appealing than the rondo theme, as they have much more of a flow to them, whereas the theme comes across as more rhetorical. The very last theme finally has a dancing quality to it. Track 13, Franz Schubert, Ihr Bild, or Your Picture. This is song number 9 from Schubert's Schwanengesang, or Swan Song, Deutsch 957, the last songs he wrote before he died. A brief 2-minute song in which the lyrical qualities of the Arpeggione are on display. This sounds like it's played solo, and the theme sometimes has double stops, bringing a more cello-like quality out of the instrument. And track 14, the final track on the album, is an arrangement of Schubert's Ständchen, or Serenade, song number 4 from Schwanengesang. I'm hearing forte, piano, and guitar both accompanying the Arpeggione in this piece, so we're getting all three musicians together, I believe for the only time on the album. The Arpeggione is mostly in its cello guise here, and the piano gets a bit of the spotlight when it plays certain melodies solo. We can also hear the guitar in spots, and I'd like to sample a spot where all three instruments can be heard. You can hear that serenade quality. Somebody's standing under your window playing that. I think you just have to marry them. Anyway, that's the end of this really excellent album. First of all, I have to point out what a beautifully clear recording this is, with just the right amount of room ambience on it. The Arpeggione is given plenty of space for all of its timbral qualities to shine, and the forte, piano, and guitar both come up with their timbres registering clearly, despite the fact that they're both relatively quiet instruments. So hats off to recording engineer Andreas Werner. The recording is apparently also available in Dolby Atmos sound, and I bet it sounds great in that format too. I heard this in 2-channel. Performances throughout are ideal, and the Schubert Arpeggione Sonata is a real thrill, with perfectly taken tempos and clear judgment of dynamic and rhythmic bounce throughout. The various timbres the Arpeggione is capable of bring this piece to a new expressive level. I think the performance is a must-hear. It's a rare occasion for the instrument Schubert originally wrote the piece for to be heard. The forte piano sound is ideal here and throughout the album. I did notice at times, especially in first movements, that the two violin sonata arrangements sounded a bit heavy in the lower range of the Arpeggione, but Martin Zeller is such a sensitive arranger that a lot of pleasant surprises emerge from the performances. The songs all feature the Arpeggione in its lyrical guise, and it does well here too. All in all, this is an enjoyable album and something unique. Lovers of Schubert's music will absolutely have to hear it, and I'm certainly glad I did. I want to mention also, the booklet notes consist of an interview with Martin Zeller, and they're very helpful in providing background and information on the instrument. But there's just that one thing, just the photos of the Orphica. I wanted to hear that instrument, and let me just say to Prospero Classical, how about a follow-up album with some tracks featuring the Orphica on it? Just a suggestion. This is a really excellent album, though.
Yeah, I thought this was a really great recording, and it's a shame that this instrument disappeared because it's so charming. The tone is wonderful and versatile. It seems somewhere between a viola and cello, and it does have a really wide range. You're fooled into trying to guess just what it is when you're listening to it. It sounds really well balanced for volume with the guitar like in the pieces here, and Zeller brings out the charm of the instrument with lyrical phrasing. As you say, there's no vibrato in there, so you get the pure tone coming through. Sometimes it's got a little bit of an edge or rasp on it, but I found it all appealing. And the pizzicato in spots on the violin sonatas were really interesting tonally as well. So I enjoyed the program. It was all easy to listen to, and I would like to hear more of this instrument. It's too bad there's not a lot more music out there, but hopefully he can make some more transcriptions and adaptations, just so we can enjoy the tone of this instrument.
I'm willing to bet that part of the reason this instrument disappears is that it just doesn't project the way, say, a viola and a cello,
right,
and even a guitar do. You know, I bet it's a very quiet instrument.
Yeah, it said it was used for small salon-type environments, so...
Right, now we have these big concert halls, which, you know, are quiet enough. The sound projects well, but it's a different sort of thing. Anyway, our second recording of the night is Piano Trios by Bedřich Smetana and Schubert again. It's a big Schubert extravaganza tonight, and his two piano trios are among my favorite works in classical music. We're going to hear Piano Trio number 2 here by Schubert and Smetana's only piano trio, which I had never heard before. This is the first time. Yeah. And this is a recording by the trio Bohémo. That's Jan Vojtek on piano, Matouš Peruška on violin. I certainly hope I'm saying these names correctly. They're Czech names. I don't speak Czech. And Kristina Vocetková on cello. This is on the Supraphone label. They are a Czech label, released on August 23rd. Now, I want to say, I remember back in the day that the aesthetic of the Supraphone label was always very, very dry sound. That seems not to be the case anymore. We've heard a few Supraphone recordings on this podcast, and they've been more in modern, like ambient sort of room sort of sound. So they've changed their engineering approach, and I, for one, am happy to hear it. I really like this new sound that they're getting. The CD booklet doesn't give information on the trio Bohémo itself, only on the program. They are Czech. They formed in 2019 and first caused a stir at the Gianni Bergamo Award in Lugano, Switzerland, where they were awarded second prize. They really went from success to success in a short time, and now we have this, their first album. I got all this from their website, by the way. In the booklet, the trio says they chose to record the album in England because England was the first country to welcome them as a trio with arms and hearts wide open. They also thank, among others, a rather familiar name if you know your chamber music groups, Hato Bejerle, who was the violist in the Alban Berg String Quartet, and he died last October at 90 years of age. He was one of the trio Bohémo's teachers from 2020 to 2022, so he really was working right to the end. So tracks 1 through 3 are Smetana's piano trio in G minor, opus 15. This was composed in 1855, revised in 1857. The death of Smetana's daughter of scarlet fever at just 4.5 years old was the direct stimulus for the writing of this work. Yeah, it's a pretty sad work. It's a remembrance of her. One of the reasons it's not so well known is that it took a long time to be published. Smetana couldn't find a publisher for the work, and it finally appeared in print 25 years after it was written. So I guess its star had set and nobody just picked it up after 25 years. I mean, why would you when there's all this new music being written, right? Anyway, We do have it now. This is the first time I've ever heard it. So the first movement, moderato assai. This starts with a dramatic weeping figure from the solo violin, powerfully played. The piano comes in with chords, and the cello joins in with the violin's weeping. Let's hear the opening. We go off into a dramatic section there. So right away we hear some drama, well communicated by the young trio Bohémo. The piano takes the theme. Balance between instruments is very good, without the very dry sound that we traditionally get, or we used to get anyway, on Supraphone recordings. As I said, I think they've changed their aesthetic. The piano is a bit thin sounding. Bass notes don't burst into the room as it can on some recordings where the piano is a lot closer. And the fact that that happens is probably a good thing in terms of the balance. The ensemble plays with exemplary clarity. There's a sweeter, gently mourning theme at the 2-minute mark, and I'm going to play that too since this is an unfamiliar work. Let's get familiar with these themes. We head into a new theme and section. The piano comes out of this theme with a galloping figure. At 3 minutes and 50 seconds is a pretty piano line in the high end, ending the exposition. The solo violin then introduces the development section, which goes into the galloping theme first, changing keys with that rhythm. At 5 minutes and 54 seconds, we hear the second theme played gently on the piano. It's a lovely section with pizzicati from the violin. At 7 minutes, the solo violin returns with the first theme, beginning the sonata's recapitulation. We hear the sweet second theme again, and at 9 minutes and 48 seconds, the galloping theme returns, crescendoing to a big climax. I didn't sample that the first time, so let's hear part of it and the ending of the movement, which is dramatically played. This is how the movement ends. I really like the way that accelerando was taken at the end. Really exciting. Yeah. Track 2, Allegro ma non agitato. This is a slow allegro, though it has a bit of a lift to it. Let's hear the opening. The piano has the theme at the beginning, At 1:25, there's a pause leading into a lyrical new section, with pizzicati in the cello and staccato chords in the piano propelling the violin's theme forward. I'm going to sample a bit of that as well. And I'll take us out of that right there. But more exciting parts follow. This theme gets passed around and reimagined and gains in energy as it develops. At 4:25, we hear the opening theme in the piano again, and this is passed around a bit. At 5:25, we have a dotted rhythm on the piano chords, sort of a fast French overture quality, as the violin and cello play a more regal melody. As we hear this melody in different guises, we notice the sensitivity of the performers in differentiating the moods of the piece. They do the gentler sections exceptionally well. The movement eventually reaches its end on a statement of the opening theme with downward moving lines in between, ending on 4 regal chords and 3 gentle pizzicati. Then we get the finale, the third movement, track 3, marked presto. It starts with a fast speed and some noticeable energy. The ensemble keeps the lines taut at this speed, while also keeping the dynamic at a bit of a hush. The repeat of the opening at the 45-second mark is impressive. Bass notes toll out of the piano after this theme, as we heard, with good focus on the tone and decent impact, though not a visceral one. This fits in with the approach as a whole, the whole sound concept of the recording. The entire 3 movements are played with excellent focus. A gentle slow theme is heard in the violin just before the 2-minute mark, and this introduces a sensitively played new theme in the strings, with quivering arpeggio figures acting as a harmonic bed in the piano. At the 3-minute and 10-second mark, the opening theme is back, so I'm guessing this is a rondo form. It's not played the same way it was at the opening, Smetana varying his figures. There's a quieter, lovely theme after the opening theme, sounding like a reorchestrated version of the music we heard at the 2-minute mark. There's an accelerando to a faster theme, played in the piano with string accompaniment, and a dramatic tension-building climb to the tonic and the final chord, which is played quietly, almost tapering off. After a pause, we briefly hear the opening theme, and then the race to the final cadence, and the piece is over. Well, where has this piece been all my life? I really enjoyed this a lot. You know, it's quite a find, so make sure you hear this if you're a chamber music fan. Next we get, one of my favorite works ever, Schubert's Piano Trio No. 2 in E-flat major, Opus 100, Deutsch 929 from 1827. Schubert wrote this at the same age Smetana wrote his trio. They were both 30 years old. But Schubert only had 1 more year to live, and Smetana was in the middle of his life. It's really odd how that happens. Both of Schubert's piano trios were written shortly after the death of Beethoven in March 1827. So track 4 is the first movement, Allegro. The opening is well-shaped, a bit on the slow side, and tracing out the rhythm carefully. Schubert's themes are carefully laid out here. So let me give you a sample so that you can get an idea of what this sounds like. Okay, now, my favorite recording of this work is probably the Florestan Trio from years and years ago on the Hyperion label. And they get a real bounce to the rhythm that we only get sort of a hint at here. The piece is played here with Viennese elegance, and particularly in the piano. I'm enjoying the detail and the shaping of the lines, but I find myself wishing this had a bit more momentum to it. Especially in the rhythm, as I mentioned earlier. It works this way, and is enjoyable, though. There's adequate tension to the shaping of the lines to keep the listener interested. At 2 minutes and 44 seconds, we arrive at the cadential material, featuring some of the material we heard in the opening themes. After this, we hear a repeat of the exposition. The entire exposition and its repeat takes 7 minutes, but it's all compelling material. No great hardship to hear it twice. At this point, the development starts cautiously with creeping lines and threads of sound from the strings. The perfect instrumental balance of the ensemble is evident in this piece as well as it was in the Smetana. The development does seem to progress at a slow pace at this tempo, though. Individual lines all remain taut. However, I like the way the piano caresses out its figures at the 10-minute mark as the strings heighten the tension harmonically. This was like a favorite detail of mine in this work, so I'm going to sample that. To a big crescendo there. There's some really fantastic writing for the piano throughout this work, so it's really enjoyable to listen to, and it really highlights the pianist Jan Vojtek's playing. We hear the opening theme at 11 minutes and 13 seconds and are now in the recapitulation of the sonata. The ending cadence is taken slowly, launching us gently into a coda at about the 14-minute mark, which we come out of with a tension-building climb that leads to some more working out of previous material. Schubert prolongs the approach to the final cadence via teasing scales in the piano and tension-releasing repeated material. At the end, the opening theme is repeated, with its ending altered to a climb to the final cadence. Track 5, the second movement, Andante con moto. Here the piano sets the tempo with his chords and the cello plays the theme. The tempo here is similar to that of the first movement, yet that was allegro, and this one is andante con moto. And it sounds andante con moto. This sounds like a proper tempo. Let's hear the opening. The tempo is well judged here, though the rhythm is played with a light tread as opposed to a more assertive sound. This is an interpretational choice. I rather like it. The ensemble are going for sensitivity again here, and it sets a lightly tense atmosphere. Wojtek's tone on the piano enchants in his quieter passages in this movement. The section leading up to the 3-minute mark could use some more tension to it. At around the 3 minutes and 30-second mark, we hear the opening theme again. At 4 minutes and 22 seconds, we hear the familiar opening melody played in the strings over more angsty piano figures. The work heads to the end, and the rhythm is subjected to a subtle decellerando, so that by the end it's creeping along. It's an interesting approach, and one that works in the context. Track 6, the third movement, Scherzo allegro moderato. The scherzo theme is also lightly played with a light jump in its step. Again, momentum could be greater, but it's there. Let's hear the opening. melodies come out with an appealing sound. The trio section starts at 3 minutes and 15 seconds and has a more lurching rhythm to it, which is drawn out by the accents given to the theme by the ensemble. The scherzo theme repeats. At this tempo, I think the themes start to sound repetitive in this performance. There needs to be more variety of expression here. Track 7, the final fourth movement, Allegro moderato, and this is the original version with the uncut finale. Schubert himself proposed the cuts with which the trio was originally published at the publisher's request that it be shorter, but the cuts were restored in a critical edition in 1975. It brings back thematic interconnection of the movements that were weakened by the cuts, and we often do hear the uncut finale these days. As with all of the previous movements, this is taken at a relatively slow speed, and I'd really like a more ebullient mood here, but I just want to say that's just me. You should really sample this and see if you really like this approach. That said, once again, the balance of instruments is something to marvel at. I've always loved the 4 repeated note theme that follows the opening theme, and here it comes up sounding mysterious at this tempo. I really like this a lot. Let's hear that theme. And the piano gets that theme, and it's really gorgeous. The section that follows, while maintaining the ensemble balance, suddenly takes off at a faster tempo and features some impressively even scales from the piano. I mentioned earlier that Vojtek gets some magical quiet sounds out of the piano, and that's the case in these scales, and when he has the repeated note theme as well. I also love the change to falling fingers in the piano when the cello gets the theme at the 5-minute mark. Let's hear a little bit of that as well. This is a really gorgeous section. Articulation is subtle and well focused throughout this movement. All sorts of variations on these lovely and extremely catchy melodic patterns follow, mostly played in a restrained fashion and with great subtlety. I noticed that, for example, at 9 minutes and 19 seconds, the very gentle violin pizzicati are clearly heard through the piano patterns and cello melody. At around the 9 minute and 50-second mark, we hear the opening, lightly marching dance theme again. Even the forte chords at 11 minutes are played with restraint, and to me this doesn't put the drama and tension they can bring across. We seem to be heading to a cadence at 12 minutes and 30 seconds, but it's interrupted by the repeated note theme and tensely accented chords. The movement heads via previously heard material to its final cadence. We hear the march briefly before the final cadence is reached. And that's the album. So the Smetana piece will be unfamiliar to most listeners, and I have to say, it's a real find. It's got drama and memorable melodies and some beautiful timbral combinations, all beautifully executed here with ideal balance by the young trio Bohémo. The trio Bohémo, in fact, present this work in the best possible light, with clarity of tone and excellent balance in the ensemble. There's lots of sensitivity in the quieter lines. If you haven't heard this work, this is the recording to hear. I don't think there are really that many others out there anyway. It'll make you wonder why this isn't played more often. The Schubert performance I liked, but there are other recordings I much prefer, like the Florestan Trios on Hyperion from around 2002, or the more recent Bush Trio recording from 2020 on Alpha. Nevertheless, this is a unique performance in its restrained, well-balanced approach. I kind of wanted to get in there and push the tempos a bit, but they're suitable in this interpretation. Both works are worthy of a hearing, but I'd return to this more for the Smetana than the Schubert, although I found the Schubert to be the more appealing work, or at least as appealing as the Smetana. Nevertheless, the trio Bohémo are a young ensemble to be reckoned with, and one I'll be interested to hear more of in the future.
I'm familiar with the Schubert Piano Trio No. 2. I enjoyed this performance, especially the phrasing. Dynamic contrasts are nice, and the balance of parts and the sound of the recording that brings them out is really good. Really, I've only heard Smetana's orchestra works. I can't think of any chamber works of his that I remember hearing before, so this trio was definitely completely new to me. It's an intriguing piece. There are a lot of contrasts, passionate and more quiet sections that balance out. I was interested in the quickly changing harmonies in the first movement, and I was starting to get familiar with the recurring theme ideas. So I'm looking forward to listening to this recording again, and hopefully I'd like to hear some more recordings of this work as well. Like I say, it's kind of surprising that it's not recorded more often because it's very appealing.
Yeah, I would agree. I want to hear other trios pick that up. All right, we're on to the Contemporary Composer of the Week.
Uh-oh.
No, don't touch that dial. Stay where you are. This is going to be great. This is the Australian composer Brett Dean. He was born in 1961, making him just a little older than me. I mean, he's actually in his 60s already. I'm not quite there yet. Almost. The name of the album is Rooms of Elsinore, and this is Brett Dean playing the viola and conducting, and there are other various artists that change with each work, and I will mention them as they come up. This is on the BIS label. I just learned this week from hearing the Gramophone podcast interviewed the president of BIS Records, and he actually asked him how to pronounce the label name.
Oh, really?
It is, in fact, BIS. Yeah, I've been saying BIS all these years because I think that's what people say when they ask for the encore. It actually means something, though. It doesn't just mean the encore. It has another meaning as well. I can't remember what he said. I'll have to listen again. This album was released on August 16th, and it's also available as a Super Audio CD if you have the equipment to hear that in 96 kilohertz sampling. So Brett Dean was born in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. He studied viola there, then moved to Germany, where he was a member of the Berliner Philharmoniker for 14 years and began composing. This is quite a career. The 5 pieces featured on this recording are the result of an extended fascination and confrontation with Shakespeare's Hamlet. This fascination started after a request in 2010 from Glyndebourne. How do you say this? Glyndebourne or Glyndebourne? I think it's I don't know. I'll say Glyndebourne Opera. For a full evening music theater work, which wound up being Dean's opera Hamlet, composed from 2013 to 2016 and premiered on June 11th, 2017 at the Glyndebourne Festival in England, or possibly the Glyndebourne Festival. So all these works come from their arrangements of themes or ideas from that opera. Tracks 1 through 5. And Once I Played Ophelia for soprano and string orchestra, composed, it says here, 2018, but there's a bit of a story behind this. The text is by Matthew Jocelyn after William Shakespeare. Jennifer France is the soprano, and this is performed by the Swedish Chamber Orchestra, conducted by the composer Brett Dean. So the work was conceived along with Gertrude fragments, which we'll hear later, as a preparatory study for particular characters within Dean's 2010 opera. It was written before work on the opera had begun, so before 2013. The notes say the work was commissioned and premiered in 2013 by the Britten Sinfonia as works for soprano and string quartet, but the year 2018 is written because this is an arrangement for string orchestra made in that year. The words are those spoken by Ophelia in the play, as well as words spoken about her or directed towards her. So we get this whole, like, almost Ophelia thought cloud of all the characters in the play, including Ophelia herself. The first movement, track 1, marked Fast and Breathless, starts out with squeaky string sounds in the violins. I know this usually chases people away, but I actually thought this was appealing. Quick staccatos as the soprano sings in a whisper and a more spoken word style. It's hard to describe, so let's just hear it.
Cathedral to a nunnery. A nunnery? Why would not be a breeder of sins? Very proud, revengeful, ambitious. Wise men know well enough what monsters you make of them. Get thee to a nunnery. A nunnery. Thou shalt not escape.
Yeah, Ophelia is not of sound mind, so we're not really going to get anything straightforward from her character. Anyway, I really do love some of the timbres in here and the athleticism of the vocals. There's some pretty good timbres in the vocal as well from Jennifer Frantz. The piece has a solid sense of form, which the soprano sort of hits against as though she's locked in a room. Most of the lyric here is Hamlet's famous admonition to get thee to a nunnery, and Jennifer Frantz right away shows a pretty amazing range. She gets way up there in this movement. There's some pretty compelling orchestration in the strings, too. You heard a bit of it in the sample. Track 2, Movement 2, Hushed, Distant, Mysterious. The movement starts very quietly, barely audible after the wild ending of the first movement. String sounds are gossamer light and feature the lightest brushing of the bows on the strings as Jennifer Frantz floats the occasional tone over them. The strings provide a quiet, squeaky timbre, like a joint that has to be oiled. The movement is very expressive, perhaps because of the limited resources it provides itself with. Frantz's soprano diminishes even further to an actual whisper at times. It is an effect I actually really like. I really like the sound of whispers, and we don't really hear them enough in music, in any kind of music really. In the 5th minute, it does finally hit a fortissimo dynamic, with the soprano sounding hysterical, and uncorking an amazing high note at 6 minutes and 15 seconds. I want to hear that note and the lead up to it. Buckle your seatbelts, listeners. Wow. That really got me out of my seat, boy. Anyway, the dynamic then decrescendos quickly to its opening volume to end the song. Track 3, 3rd movement, fast and agitated. The music quickly moves into this movement without a pause, and it features the soprano in a more histrionic mood. I think you might think you've been hearing her in histrionic mood in the previous sample, but it gets more histrionic here. There are a number of high notes in this movement. Strings scurry in accompaniment. I should mention the texts, due to their being taken from all over Shakespeare's play, wind up giving more of an overall mood of the thoughts directed toward Ophelia rather than anything intellectually coherent. The soprano's impressive range of expression continues with an actual growl in the 1st minute and the sound of someone possibly vomiting in the 3rd minute. I want to hear that part so that you hear what I mean. Alas, Ophelia is not doing well at this point of the song cycle. This section also features scraping strings that recall Bernard Herrmann's score for Psycho as well. The music then quietens for the ending. Track 4, the 4th movement, extremely still. The music calms to sustained chord waves as the soprano sings thoughtfully here. The texts are brief. It's there is a willow, grows askant the brook, etc. Time or the emotions seem frozen in this movement. A violin gets a legato solo at the end with attractive tone. Track 5, slow and austere. The text here is Ophelia's mental breakdown song, where she sings "Good night, ladies, good night." It's the featured text in this movement. The movement continues the still move here. We get a sense of waves or water in the orchestra, appropriately so, as Ophelia is found dead floating in a stream. The soprano sings calmly here, though not without a sense of being unhinged, a sense given by the sudden high notes. I thought this was an evocative score, to be honest. Track 6 through 12, Rooms of Elsinore. This is the title track. It's for viola and piano, composed in 2016, and features our composer Brett Dean on the viola, showing his viola chops, and Juho Pohjonen on piano. This set of movements best encapsulate the spirit and intention of the collection, according to Dean. It's a sonic exploration of the spaces, atmospheres, and archetypes of emotion and character, in which and through which the tragedy of Hamlet unfolds. The work was inspired by a visit to the so-called Hamlet Castle of Kronborg in the Danish town of Elsinore, and Dean says it's his attempt to fly a drone over the play's supposed setting, moving from room to room, reimagining the dark, covert drama of Hamlet unfolding in a real space, replete with tapestries, furnishings, concealed doors, and narrow corridors. Track 6 is the first movement, The Dark Gate. The work starts with the piano playing quietly through probing lines deep in the bass. The viola is in by the 30-second mark and plays at first in a sustained manner, drawing the bow across the string in a subtle chord crescendo. The viola adds busier figuration around these chords. Let's hear a sample from around the 1 minute and 45-second mark where the music gains some energy in the two instruments. Dean gets some good momentum going in his playing of the figures. The music builds still further in busyness and expression as the movement progresses, yet more or less keeping to the pattern we heard. Track 7, the second movement, The Four-Gate Courtyard. This is a brief movement and starts with the viola doing a diminuendo, as though we've left one location and are in another. The piano chimes out quiet chords as the distant violin continues its figuration. The piano chords rise into the high end of the piano. Track 8, the third movement, The Platform. There's a bit of silence before the movement starts. It starts an entirely new viola line and piano accompaniment. So let's hear a bit of that. Some drooping glissandi there. In fact, the viola line throughout this movement is droopy, with downward glissandos that give a heavy feeling to the line. The viola reaches up for high, quiet harmonics at the end as the piano sinks to its bass depths, quietly playing low-frequency tones. Track 9, the fourth movement, The King's Chamber. This features busy viola figuration over a more thematic piano line. The viola pretty much sets a wild tempo as the piano's accents encourage it on. After the 2-minute mark, the piano takes up some mid-tempo figuration as the viola plays something more thematic, though fragmented. The viola engages in a lot of experimentation with tone in this movement when it's not rapidly playing figures. The piano line rises at the end to a shimmering higher range. We end with a repeating viola figure, which the piano breaks up with a final flourish. Track 10 is the fifth movement, The Chapel. The piano sounds rather sinister with its quick lines, while the viola plays a double-stopped set of tones that waver into quarter tones, sounding a bit like it's being tuned. This continues throughout the movement as the piano creeps around staccato in the low end. The dynamic is piano throughout. Piano meaning soft in this case. Track 11, the sixth movement, the Queen's Chamber. There are some squeaking effects on the viola, punctuated by piano accents. And that's the way the movement starts, and I think we should hear that. Now, if you're not listening in a quiet room, I'm afraid you're going to miss a lot of that really enjoyable detail in the viola. So put on some headphones for that part, or sample it on your own on the links provided. At 1 minute and 40 seconds, a unison section starts with the piano and viola playing brief lines. This is broken up by the viola playing the squeaky opening theme, then harmonics on a repeating note as the piano reaches up high. Track 12, the final movement, movement 7, the Trumpeter's Tower. The music suddenly changes without pause to the viola reaching for a melody as the piano accompanies with bell-like chords. Let me sample the beginning of this. I really do love that throaty sound that the viola gets towards its lower end. The piano starts accompanying with repeating bass notes as the viola slowly contemplates via a theme with long sustained lines. The music slowly diminuendos and slows down until at the end we're left with lightly brushed out high harmonics in the viola and gently tolling bell-like chords in the piano. Tracks 13 through 17 are the Gertrude fragments for mezzo-soprano and guitar, composed in 2016. The text again is by Matthew Jocelyn and Brett Dean, after William Shakespeare. This features Lotte Betts-Dean, mezzo-soprano, and Andrei Lebedev on guitar. The guitar is used in tribute to the Elizabethan lute song tradition, and the mezzo, Lotte Betts-Dean, is the composer's daughter. And these songs were written for her and guitarist Andrei Lebedev, who's playing here as well. Track 13, the first movement, Cast Thy Nighted Color Off. The sound of the guitar comes as a surprise. It sounds modern with this interrupted arpeggio rhythm. The vocal here is more straightforwardly song-like than it was in And Once I Played Ophelia. High notes are beautifully floated out rather than histrionically released, and the entire mood here is different. Let's sample this. Track 14, the second movement, Wring from Him the Cause. This song is more anxious, with a quick guitar line accented by sudden chords. The vocal line is quicker in rhythm here too, but remains song-like. Let's hear this.
Welcome, dear Rosenkranz and Guildenstern. Welcome, dear Guildenstern, dear Rosenkranz. We much did long to see you. Hamlet hath much talked of you. To men there is not living to whom him adieus your visitation.
Track 15, the third movement, My Too Much Changed Son. These songs are all rather short, and this one has only a 2-line verse. But look how sadly the poor wretch comes, my too much changed son. The vocal consists of stretched syllables. It's a slow line. Track 16, the fourth movement, How Ist With You. This is only 37 seconds long. The verse is also 2 lines long and is pretty quick. Guitar accompaniment is only a few plucked notes. And the final movement, movement 5, track 17, If Words Be Made of Breath. Also brief at 1 minute, the song has a descending pattern on the guitar and the vocal line sinks lower as it goes until the last line when it reaches up momentarily, ending at the bottom of the mezzo's range for some interesting vocal color. Track 18, a very interesting work, Confessio for bass clarinet solo, 2019. And listeners to this podcast will know how much I was anticipating hearing this work. This is Volker Hemken on the bass clarinet. The work examines a momentous entrance point of Hamlet's uncle, Claudius. In the castle's chapel, he holds a monologue, less prayer and more confessional reflection. He reveals to himself the deep fear he has of the consequences of his murderous actions and a vague, if scarcely justifiable, hope for forgiveness. So the piece opens with fading in with a reedy, low tone. There are some extended sounds, something percussive, I'm not sure how it's done, to break off lines. You can hear that a bit in the first minute. Let me get to the 1 minute mark and sample from there. The recording catches the rich, reedy tone of the low end of the instrument, and this is a work I'd really like to see performed live because I'd like to see how that effect is created with that percussive effect. The first few minutes of the piece are relatively quiet and contemplative, and this changes in the third minute as the instrument reaches up into its higher range. Let's hear a bit of that. Hemken gets some interesting reedy sounds out of the instrument as it sinks into its mid-range after this section. By the 6th minute, we're hearing spread tones again. Again, I don't know the technique, but it certainly catches the ear. Let's hear a little bit of that. The piece in general is very spacious, and a quiet section follows the sample. Energy picks up in the 8th minute, and we hear some impressive virtuosity from Hemken all the way to the 10th minute, when quiet, expressive, sustained tones dominate. A downward sequenced pattern ends the piece. And then we get to the final piece on the album, The Players. This is tracks 19 through 23. It's a concerto for accordion and small orchestra, composed 2018 to 2019. This features James Crabb on the accordion, the Swedish Chamber Orchestra, and Brett Dean conducting. In sketches for the opera, Dean composed various ideas for solo accordion. He sensed that this instrument would be the perfect onstage musical accompaniment for the scenes from the first act of the Hamlet opera in a suite of 5 connected movements. Track 19 is a prelude, the first movement. The orchestral winds begin by setting a mysterious, distant atmosphere. The accordion isn't played like one of those instruments you hear people playing in the Paris subway. It begins with atonal chords and quick, disjointed patterns. Let's hear a sample of that. Yeah, atonal wasn't the right word there. I should have said discordant, but we'll just let that sit. It's a pretty interesting sound to hear in this context. The waves of sustained chords connect to the second movement. Track 20, it's called Look, Look, Look Where My Abridgment Comes. This is rhythmically more active. Let's sample the opening. This is some pretty impressive virtuosic accordion playing. Crabb draws a lot of expression out of the instrument that we usually don't hear. The orchestration is interesting too, drawing on some quieter percussion resources for color. I really liked the accordion lines from the 2-minute mark where it gets some time alone to play sequenced arpeggiated patterns. Track 21, the third movement, Fanfare, the players arrive. This connects and doesn't change tempo or rhythm from the previous movement. It starts excitably. Then around the 20-second mark, the energy subsides, and the accordion plays a winding pattern via arpeggios. The energy more or less keeps up like this. Track 22, the fourth movement, Pantomime. This connects too. These individual movements are more like sections of a large composition rather than movements. It continues energetically until about 20 seconds in, when the energy flags and a more somber section is heard. What we hear is a kind of ebbing and flowing of drama in this section, representing the emotions of a stage play. This fourth movement or section is the longest of the 5, clocking in at over 8 minutes. The rest are all around 3 minutes. At around the 3-minute mark, the accordion gets a spacious moment accompanied by individual strings meant to accentuate the accordion's timbre. It's clever orchestrating throughout the 3rd minute. There's a mysterious moment from around the 5-minute and 50-second mark where the strings create a sort of Bartokian night music atmosphere, and the accordion comes in for the occasional chord accent. It's hard to isolate a section to sample, but I guess the sudden outburst of quirky lines at 7 minutes and 35 seconds is best, though it's hardly characteristic of the entire movement, which is made up of a lot of contrasting sections. So let's hear from 7 minutes and 35 seconds. So the music builds up to a climax from that point. Track 23, the final movement, 5th movement, Postlude. The strings glissando downwards after the big dramatic finale of the previous movement, down into the depths. It's a pretty cool effect. There's a downward moving theme to this movement as the accordion also plays downward spiraling patterns. At 1 minute and 43 seconds, the accordion starts a hiccuping pair of chords. The piece suddenly becomes quiet with only distant, very quiet percussion sounds occasionally audible. And that's that album. This wound up being an entire Shakespearean evening for me, and the music and its themes can cast the bard's spell on you too. It's a place I like to be, personally, and that drew me into the music more than I would ordinarily allow on a first listen. The music itself is very approachable. I like the way Jennifer France sounds so comfortable in the vocal part in the first work, and once I played Ophelia, which is remarkable given that it's a new work. It sounds lived in, and it's a fantastic performance, highly virtuosic. Likewise with Lottie Betts-Dean, the composer's daughter, in the more song-like Gertrude fragments. I enjoyed hearing Andrei Lebedev's guitar, too. As for the instrumental works, Volker Hemken delivers a tour de force on the bass clarinet on the 10-minute solo Confessio, drawing out a lot of the instrument's resources, all of which I enjoyed hearing. Rooms of Elsinore and the players were both dramatic. Rooms of Elsinore featuring the composer's impressive viola playing and the players offering virtuosity from James Crabb's accordion. Overall, I got a suitable sense of drama from the works, being that they're all inspired by Hamlet. I think the takeaway for me was how comfortable the soloists throughout the album sounded playing these new works. I imagine they've lived with them for a long time. This is the kind of album a composer hopes for. All performances put the music in its best expressive light so that the music comes across expressively. This is an impressive release and a good sounding one too.
For me, I'm just going to talk about the works that I found most appealing, which was the last third of the album. The bass clarinet Confessio, I thought was really interesting. It held my attention with interesting techniques, sounds, and exploring the full range of the instrument. It's an instrument that we both really enjoy, and I've never heard anything like this in the classical repertoire before with just solo bass clarinet. And so I thought that was a really interesting composition and an outstanding performance as well. As you said, it would be an interesting one to see visually in a live performance. And I found the players really engaging too. This was quite different than everything else on the recording. The combination of accordion and woodwind interaction was unique. I liked the muted brass in the wind sounds as well. And there was a mix of eerie, mysterious sections and more rambunctious rhythmic passages. And I didn't know what to expect, but I found myself being entertained and intrigued as I went through it. So he seems to be a composer with many facets. We've got these vocal works. Of the two, I preferred the one with the guitar, the Gertrude Fragments, more myself. And I thought the guitar playing on that was really done well as well and matched the vocal technique. The longer first histrionic work, I was getting kind of worn out in that a bit.
I really did like the timbres in that one, though.
It's interesting, and I tried to follow along with the Shakespeare references and see what he was aiming for in the total arc. But yeah, definitely a unique composer, and it'd be interesting to hear some of his other works as well. Over on to the jazz half of the program. I've got mostly major label releases this week, and we're going to start out with the Cellar Live label and vibraphonist Warren Wolf, and he's going to give us the history of the vibraphone.
Oh, I could use one of those.
Another instrument we both like a lot. This came out August 23rd. Warren Wolf started playing music at the age of 3. Learning the vibraphone, marimba, drums, and piano. He was classically trained, attending the Peabody Institute's preparatory program for 8 years. He attended high school at the Baltimore School for the Arts, where he graduated in 1997, and then he went on to Berklee College of Music, where he studied under jazz vibraphonist Dave Samuels for 7 of 8 semesters. In the remaining semester, he got instruction from vibraphonist Ed Sandin. His self-titled debut recording in 2011 featured bassist Christian McBride, and he's released 5 more recordings after that before this recording, as well as being a sideman on a number of other recordings. We've actually heard him a few times on the podcast, going back to episode 124, Mexican Skull and Latin Bones. We heard him on Javier Nero's Kemet the Blackland, that was on Outside in Music, and also in episode 130, Lovin' Good Vibes. We heard him on Compton's Finest. That was drummer Brandon Sanders' recording on Savant.
Yeah, and I also remember hearing him on a Christmas album that he put out a few years ago.
Right. About this recording, Wolf says, quote, "What I decided to do on History of the Vibraphone is to play material from some of the top players who've ever held a pair of mallets in their hands. These artists that I've decided to pay tribute to include Terry Gibbs, Lionel Hampton, Milt Jackson, Bobby Hutcherson, Cal Tjader, Gary Burton, Roy Ayers, Dave Samuels, and Joe Luck. There's so much music that I wish I could have included on History of the Vibraphone. Maybe we'll have to save that for History of the Vibraphone Part 2.
Wow.
That'd be neat as well. So on this recording, Vibraphone by Warren Wolf, Tim Green on alto saxophone and also soprano saxophone, Alex Brown on piano and Fender Rhodes, Vicente Archer on bass, and Carol C.V. Dashiell III on drums. Executive producer Corey Weeds and Raymond Torchinsky, produced by Jeremy Pelt. And this was recorded at GB's Juke Joint, Long Island City, New York on December 1st, 2023. Engineered, mixed, and mastered by Colin Monox. We're going to start out with Bobsticle Course, a tune by Terry Gibbs. This is from the album of the same name in 1974. We We heard this tune on Jerry Gibbs's tribute to his father, Songs from My Father, on Wailing City Sound. That was back in episode 37. It's an AABA 32-measure melody with ringing open interval piano and bass chords on the A sections, and then a contrasting swinging walking bass B section. Wolf and Brown's piano take the A sections in unison, and Wolf is off into a swinging solo. Let's hear the recording get going. A nice snappy attack on the vibraphone there. Brown gets a piano solo too, and they're back to the melody soon with a short tune to start the recording at just under 2.5 minutes. Track 2, Midnight Sun, a tune by vibraphonist Lionel Hampton and Sonny Burke, recorded back in 1948. This is a gorgeous melody with lyrics often recorded as a vocal number. Here Green leads it, taking the melody on alto sax after blowing an 8-measure intro. Let's check it out. Before. It's got 14 measure A sections to it, and then an 8 measure B section with more of a swinging feel that Wolf takes the lead on, continuing on to double up with Green on the final A section. And let's hear some of Wolf's solo on this one later in the tune. Rhythmically interesting and easy flowing phrasing. And there's just a final A section there, joined by Brown to a vamping outro with some wispy sax improvised lines that give it a dreamy ending. Track 3, Django, by pianist John Lewis of the Modern Jazz Quartet, recorded on their self-titled album from 1955, of course featuring Milt Jackson on vibraphone. A slow and longing ballad start, Wolf and Brown move in sync with piano chords under the vibe's melody all over Archer's deep-bowed bass, and like the original Modern Jazz Quartet version, after the 20-measure slow melody, it gets off swinging, here with piano from Brown. Let's pop in on the last phrase of that melody into the switch just before a minute in. Thumping heartbeat bass underneath as Brown continues on with bluesy improvisations, and let's hear the climax of Wolf's vibraphone solo on this one. Finishes up with the slow melody section. Track 4, Herzog, from Bobby Hutcherson. This is from his 1969 recording Total Eclipse. The last time we heard this tune on the podcast was on drummer Richard Boratta's Off the Charts album with Jerry Bergonzi on sax and Dave Kukoski on piano. Here, Green is back on sax to work the melody with Wolf. And let's have a listen to Green's hot and tart-toned alto solo on this tune once it gets going. Yeah, really burning it up there. Brown follows from there, and then Wolf gets a solo too, and then all three soloists get another go. And Wolf is really letting the mallets fly here, so let's check out a little bit of his second solo as well. simple melody from there to finish it up. Track 5 is Cal Tjader's Sad Eyes, and this is from his 1973 recording Tambu with Charlie Bird. But I don't believe that he wrote this tune. Discogs.com and AllMusic both credit the pianist on that recording, Michael Wolff, as writing it. I'm not sure if someone wants to check that out. They give this a more placid feel than the original with a relaxed bossa beat. Brown is on Rhodes, and Green takes the melody on alto sax before Wolff comes in on the second half. Let's hear a little bit of this melody. Wolff and Green both have melodic and lyrical solos on this one, and then they switch sections of the melody that they played from what we just heard before a little vamped ending with some Rhodes tinkling from Brown. Track 6, Captain Signor Mouse. This is a Chick Corea composition. I'm not sure about this tune. There was Captain Signor Mouse from Return to Forever, I remember. I think that's a different tune than just Senior Mouse, or a different version of it. Anyway, he recorded this with Gary Burton in 1972 on Crystal Silence, and Wolff recorded this also on his debut album as well. Here it starts with a soft but intricate rhythmic duo of piano and vibes, fitting for its provenance with the Burton recording. Drums and bass are in just before 2 minutes, and Green joins in on the melody on soprano sax. Let's hear some of that exciting transition a little bit into the tune. It's a really nice arrangement. Things come down softer for a piano solo from Brown. And let's hear some of Green's soprano sax solo on this one with really popping drums underneath from Dashiell about 4.5 minutes in. Wolff's solo really snaps to the bass and drum groove here. And green returns for the final melody section. Track 7 is Roy Ayers' Vibrations. This is from Roy Ayers and Ubiquity Vibrations album from 1976. The original has a real R&B groove with popping bass and kind of really 70s style female vocals floating on top of it a little bit. Very much 70s production. Here the groove is light and tight with Brown on Rhodes and Wolf handling the sunny melody. Let's hear it get going. Let's hear a little bit of his grooving solo on this as well. Conclusion to that, and Brown has a Rhodes solo on this tune as well. Track 8 is Spring High from Dave Samuels from his 1991 Natural Selection album, and I saw Dave Samuels with Spyro Gyra and Chick Corea and Electric Band. That was back in 1988. I had a second row ticket right in front of the stage, and I'm like, this is great. There's nobody in the front row. And this huge guy, he was a conga player from South Africa. I still remember this, John Smythe. He sat right down in front of me. And he turned around and he kept talking to me the whole time during the show. So if anyone knows what happened to John Smythe, the South African conga player, let us know. Anyway, it was a great show. The original recording has electric bass, and Samuel starts it out on marimba. I like this arrangement here with rhythmic vibes, acoustic bass, and Green's soprano sax. Let's have a listen to this version. Harmonic surprises that come along in that melody. And let's hear some of Wolf's soloing on this one. lots of nice bluesy licks and a little surprise ending there. Brown has a piano solo from there, and Green gets a soprano sax solo as well. Track 9 is Joe Locke's Saturn's Child. This is from his 1998 recording Slander and Other Love Songs. After an 8-measure intro, Green and Wolf work the patient 28-measure melody together. Nice bass work from Archer on this one. Let's just hear a round of Wolf's solo on this tune. There's a great arc to that solo, and it's back to the melody from there to finish up the tune. And track 10 is one of Wolf's originals, I See You Baby Looking at Me. An R&B groove for this one with Rhodes and tight bass. The melody has a riffy A section and more ringing chords on the B part. Let's have a listen. Has time to stretch out for the whole tune here, building up slowly, working around the riff idea. There's a really nice speedy climax he reaches at about 4 minutes. I'd like to hear him build up to that. Yeah, speedy mallets, nice bluesy touches. They bring it down for the melody again and then work up some more excitement to the ending. And the recording ends with an alternate take of Midnight Sun. This is interesting. No sax on this one, and the rhythmic feel is completely different. It's slower, and the drums are brushed and sparse. It comes in a minute shorter as well. So have a listen to this and compare it to the version in track 2. A history of the vibraphone, indeed. Wolf picks out some great tunes by past and present vibe greats, plus one of his originals, and serves up some interesting arrangements with a lot of variety, mixing in Green's alto and soprano sax, and switching up the atmosphere with Brown's acoustic piano and Rhodes. Wolf's playing is technically impressive, but always musical with nicely constructed solos. Green's sax is exciting, and Brown has some good solo spots as well. Archer and Dashiell skillfully lock in on a variety of rhythmic feels and grooves, from swinging to Latin to R&B, and it all just sounds great.
Yeah, Warren Wolf is a pretty virtuosic player. He plays with a lot of energy, and he's also got like sort of the sustain is set pretty low, but he's got some. I've heard it like, during the pauses. So the attack is like the main part of his sound. He has like some highly melodic playing. Now, in this album, the drums are a constant presence, adding a lot of metallic sheen via the cymbals. They're sort of quietly recorded, not overpowering the soloist, though it sounds like Dashiell's hitting the drums really hard. Alex Brown's piano is impressive, though he could have been recorded more forward, I thought. He brings a lot of excitement in Herzog and some variety when he plays the Fender Rhodes on several tracks. I like the Fender Rhodes, kind of put you in that 70s sort of mode there. Anyway, Tim Green is pretty versatile, playing both alto and soprano sax. I like the tone and that winding quality he gets on his solos on the soprano sax, especially. I kind of thought the recording could have used more like separation between the instruments, like more dimensionality between the drums and the solo instrument. They all kind of sound like they're all of a piece. But it's all perfectly audible. It's not a problem. The music itself is, like you said, a bit of a history lesson, but I heard a lot of 70s vibes, and especially towards the end on tracks with the Fender Rhodes. And of course, I love the vibraphone, so this was an enjoyable listen.
Yeah, we're waiting for Volume 2.
Yeah, I like his playing. He's good.
Whenever you're ready, Warren.
Yeah.
Next recording on Lecoq Records, Michael Dease, Grove's Groove. This came out on August 23rd, and this album is a tribute to trumpeter Roy Hargrove and Dease's second recording that features him exclusively on Barry sax. Why that is significant is that Dease was the Downbeat magazine critics' poll for Best Trombonist winner 3 years running from 2020 to 2023. That's trombone.
Yeah.
We've discussed all of his recent releases on the podcast and found out that, in fact, he started out as an alto saxophonist, switching mainly to trombone and gaining notoriety as one of the top players out there. And the notes for this new recording inform us that Roy Hargrove was someone that encouraged Dease to also share his sax playing with the world, and Dease was a member of Hargrove's big band. We heard him on his Barry sax recording debut on 2023's The Other Shoe, the music of Greg Hill, and then we also heard his first all-Barry sax recording, Swing Low, later in the year. And here he is with a new one, all on Barry sax, along with a lot of musicians who had an association with Roy Hargrove over his career. So Michael Dease on Barry sax, Steve Davis on trombone, Terrell Stafford trumpet on 2 tunes, Jocelyn Gould on guitar and vocal, Bill Cunliffe on piano, Rodney Whitaker on bass, who was a sideman on many Roy Hargrove recordings, Ulysses Owens Jr. on drums, Alex Acuna on percussion, Jim Alfredson joins in on organ for a tune, and Eli Howell on trombone for 1 tune as well. The recording's going to get going with Grove's Groove, the title track. This is by Steve Davis. You can find this on his recording Update from 2005 with Roy Hargrove. It's a great groove for sure, with harmonized Barry sax and trombone melody lines. It's like a 12-bar blues with an extra measure for the horn phrase pickup. The solos will follow the 12-measure pattern. Let's check out the start of the recording. Now Dease gets the first solo here, and of course we want to hear that Barry sax right away, so let's just jump right back in and hear some of his playing. Yeah, really nice agility there. Gould follows with a chilled-out guitar solo with some nice double stops in the lines. Davis and Cunliffe get solos too. The horns lead into a bass solo from Whittaker, as well as before getting back to a couple final rounds of the melody, with Owens getting some drum fills on the ending. It's a groovy, fun start to the recording. Track 2 is T for Two, Vincent Yeoman's classic standard tune. The notes say this was taught to Dease by Hargrove at after-hours playing at Small's Jazz Club. Cunliffe makes a piano intro joined just by Whittaker's bass for Gould to come in with the intro vocals. Most people know the main melody to this tune, but we don't always hear the intro, so let's have a listen.
Discontented with homes that are rented, so I have invented my own. Darling, this place is a lover's oasis where life's weary chase is unknown. Far from the cry of the city, where flowers pretty caress the stream, cozy to hide in, to live side by side in. Don't let it abide in my dreams. Picture me upon your knee.
Yeah, things are off swinging from there. I really like the pure quality of the tone of her voice. Dease and Davis add some backing improvisations behind her. Dease gets the first solo on this one with fine, lazy phrasing, but let's hear Gould's guitar solo on this one and Davis's muted trombone. Breezy mood. Cunliffe starts his piano solo from there. His last turnaround has a phrase that reminds me of Tad Dameron. See if you can pick that out. And Whittaker has a chugging bass solo before Gould is back from the third A section of the melody to finish things up. Track 3, a Michael Dease original, Seiko Time. And the notes say comes from his time playing in Japan. Of course, here we are in the land of Seiko watches. And I think he first experienced Japan playing with Roy Hargrove. A steady Latin beat minor blues with Alex Acuna providing some tasty additional percussion. The unison horn line melody leaves the last two measures open. Let's check it out. Cunliffe solos first on this tune with a great touch and sense of space, but let's hear a little bit more of Dease's Barry playing on this one. Super cool. Davis and Gould get solos too before it's back to the melody with some added improvised ideas from Dease and a few final phrase repeats with fills from Acuna. Track 4, Minor Funk from Cyrus Chestnut, the pianist. This is on his 2001 Soul Food recording, and he played with Roy Hargrove way back in 1994 on the With the Tenors of Our Time recording. Owens opens it with some hard-hitting drumming, and the syncopated unison lines build up from the rhythm section to the horns with muted trumpet added from Stafford. Let's hear the tune get going. Dease and Davis take the first solos here, and since Stafford's the guest, let's check out his muted solo on this tune. Exciting solos from Terrell Stafford. Cunliffe gets the last solo, and Owens leads in and fills out a final time through the melody. Track 5, Never Let Me Go. Here's a standard, Ray Evans, Jay Livingston tune sung by Nat King Cole from the film The Scarlet Hour. And Dease says in the notes that this was Roy Hargrove's favorite ballad. Bill Cunliffe is the rhythm section here, no bass or drums, and he makes a lush and warm intro before Gould is in on the vocals. Let's come in with her to hear some more of her singing at about a minute in.
Never let me go. Love me much too much. If you let me go, life would lose its touch. What would I be without you? There's no place for me without you. Without you I know, because of one caress my world was overturned from the very start.
Dease has a sublime bari sax solo on this one, but let's hear some of Conlif's solo playing here.
Because of one caress, my world.
Gould is back with backing from Dease to take it to the end. Track 6, saxophonist Charles McPherson's The Viper. This is from his 1966 recording live at the 5 Spot. It's a 12-bar blues with a funky groove. Stafford is back on trumpet, with Eli Howell joining in on trombone too, and you'll know something new is up right away with the sounds of Jim Alfredson's Hammond organ on the first round before the horns are in for a couple times through the blues melody. We loved Alfredson's recording Family Business. Be sure to check that one out. But let's hear what he's doing on this tune. Well, they'll take it around once more. Stafford gets the first solo, and Davis and trombonist Eli Howell gets solos. At Dease's solo, there's some fun stop time, and Conliffe has a funky piano solo as well. But we better check out Alfredson's organ solo on this one, since it's the only track he plays on. And they get back to the melody for a couple rounds with a final funky exchange between Conliffe and Alfredson. I think we should just check that out before we leave this tune. Track 7 is a Conliffe original, Decisions. This comes from Dease's 2015 album of the same name. Cunliffe makes a rubato intro and then sets up the medium swinging tempo for Dease to come in on the melody. Let's hear it get started. Seems like that main melody section is 16 measures, and then there's a 4-measure transition section that Davis joins in on before taking a run through that melody section on his own with Dease backing. Dease, Cunliffe, and Davis get solos, but let's check out Whitaker's bass solo on this one. Dease and Davis are back to take the melody out once more. Track 8 is a Dease original, Father Figure. This is the title track of his 2016 album. The notes say it was originally written in response to Whitaker's nurturing of bassist Endea Owens, who played on that album. And here the meaning expands to pay tribute to Hargrove's guidance as well. This has a 32-measure charming melody idea. The first half is taken in unison by Davis and Whitaker over drums, and then Dease comes in to replace the trombone with some chords added by Cunliffe, the horns finishing it up together. Let's take a listen. And Whitaker is off on the first solo from there. Davis has a solo with great tone and melodic ideas. For Dease's solo, bass, piano, and drums drop out, leaving him over Gould's strumming, which is a neat surprise and a nice contrast. So let's check that out. The rest of the rhythm section is back. From there, as Dease plays on, Conniff gets a solo and Gould gets to do some trading fours with Owens' drums before they get back to the melody for a final round. And the recording's going to end up with Broadway, a tune first recorded by Count Basie and his orchestra in 1940 by Bill Byrd, Teddy McRae, and Henry Wood. Swinging fun with phrase exchanges between Dease and Davis on this classic tune. Let's hear it get going. Dease has the first solo. Let's hear one more solo from Davis before we finish up the recording. Great tone, power, and finesse. Gould has the next solo there. Conniff has a solo too with a little nod to Charlie Parker before the horns are back to bring Whitaker and Owens in for some solo sections and a final melody run. And that's it. It's a fine tribute to the influence of trumpeter Roy Hargrove from some of today's finest players, many of whom came under his influence. In a way, I suppose I was influenced by him too, meeting him back when I was in high school. We were both high school students. A variety of tunes here, including originals from the players, a new one from Dease, and a couple standards. The frontline melodies and solos come from the great combination of Dease and Davis. Dease showing that he's the real deal on bari sax. Conniff's piano playing is great as always throughout, and Whitaker has some nice solo spots with tight and sometimes hard-hitting drums from Owens, and more variety with some classy vocals and guitar from Jocelyn Gould, two tunes with Terrell Stafford's trumpet adding excitement, Jim Alfredson's organ, and Alex Acuna's percussion adding the final spices to the recipe. You're guaranteed to like it.
Yeah, it's really immediately appealing. And it's a good recording, too, of the entire band. Yeah. All instruments are up close in the mix and clear with ample room ambience on them. Although I thought Never Let Me Go was mysteriously recorded maybe at too close a range. I mean, the sound just really came bursting out. It's a quiet track that really explodes out of the speaker, but otherwise I really liked the production on this record a lot. It's good to hear Michael Dease on baritone sax throughout the album. He's really great. Yeah. He's got a good tone. He'll hang out toward, but not quite in the lower range of the instrument, and that's the range we like to hear. That's why we listen to the baritone sax. I guess he likes that slightly reedy resonance too, and I found his playing to be tasteful throughout and highly melodic. And I like him as a trombonist too, but those duties go to Steve Davis here. And so we don't miss that sound on this album. He has an appealing melodic style as well. Those are the two instruments I really zeroed in on this album. I also like Bill Cunliffe's tasteful piano playing, and of course, guest Jim Alfredson's soulful organ on the Viper. That made me seek out the album by him that we both listened to.
Yeah.
Family Business, right. Yeah, it's a good record. And I thought the playing throughout was highly tasteful. This makes a really good evening listen, I thought. I really liked all the sounds coming out.
Yeah, really nice.
Good timbres. Yeah, good tones, too.
It's great to hear Barry sax and trombone as the lead instruments. It's a real full, fat sound, you know?
Yeah, they're towards the low end, and I don't know what it is. I just love those low-end instruments. I always have.
Sounds great. All right, in our final recording this week, over on High Note Records, also coming out August 23rd, Alternate Summer by Tom Harrell. Tom Harrell is one of the senior statesmen of jazz trumpet at 78 years old.
Wow.
In 1969, he graduated from Stanford University with a music composition degree. He joined Stan Kenton's orchestra. After leaving Kenton, Harrell played with Woody Herman's big band, Azteca, the Horace Silver Quintet, and then he had a long association with Phil Woods. He's also performed with Vince Guaraldi on the Peanuts television specials, You're Not Elected, Charlie Brown, 1972, which just came out.
It's really the cues for the special, though. They're not actually full.
Right, they're just little short
tracks,
samples, yeah. Also, there's No Time for Love, Charlie Brown, and a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. And it's a mystery, Charlie Brown. So you might have heard Tom Harrell's trumpet when you were a kid watching TV and didn't even know about it.
Yeah, on that Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, he's on that a lot. And not only that, those are really kind of funky versions of all those tunes.
Yeah.
The Fender Rhodes piano is in there. It sounds really great.
I was fortunate to see him play a few times and talk to him, too, back when I was a high school student, even maybe, and university as well. So that was inspirational to me. He's got 30 albums as a leader, covering Latin rhythms, Baroque-influenced music, big band, and a lot more. I have most of those recordings on a shelf. They're all lined up. They take up the whole shelf. And with Tom Harrell, his compositions are often like musical puzzles that his improvisations will find inventive and musically satisfying ways of navigating through. We heard Harrell's previous release from 2022, Oak Tree, back in episode 73, Heavy Hitters, which was a quartet recording. Here he's got the same core rhythm section, plus 2 saxophonists and guitar on several tracks. So Tom Harrell on trumpet in all compositions, Dana Stevens on tenor sax on some tracks, also Mark Turner splitting the tenor sax duties. I'll point out who's on which tracks. Luis Perdomo on piano, Fender Rhodes, and Hammond B3 organ on one track here as well. Charles Altura on acoustic and electric guitar on several tracks. Ugono Akegwo on bass and Adam Cruz on drums. The recording is going to start out with a tune called Miramar. I guess that would mean Sea View. Turner is on the first tune here on sax that has a really bouncy groove to it and horn lines to match. The melody construction is interesting. It sounds like 3 measures of 4 beats, then a 2-beat measure. That repeats, then there's a 12-measure section, and then 2 measures transitioning to Harrell's solo that seems to start with a question. Let's have a listen. There's a great sense of space between his phrases, and Tom Harrell does not run out of ideas. It's a long improvisation. Let's come back in about a minute more down the road and see how he wraps all of this up. Orchegwa's bass is really thumping underneath, and Harrell's phrases snap with rhythmic ideas in his melodies. Turner follows from there with a solo that keeps a smooth sense of phrasing over his meandering lines, and Perdomo gets a Rhodes solo too, with some smooth running lines balancing out snappy bluesy ideas, and we hear the melody once more to finish it up. Track 2 is called Peanut. Turner stays on sax for this one, Altura joins in on guitar, and that guitar sound helps out the strong rhythmic push of this 28-measure melody that really doesn't let up, with repeated notes over the changing harmonies. Harrell gets the first solo with interesting ideas over the rising chords at the ends of phrases. Let's hear this one get going into the start of his solo. Turner gets a solo on this one as well, with smooth high-register ideas in his lines, and Harrell's back for some more improvisations for a new funky groove feel. Things are broken up by little tag phrases of sax and guitar that also end the tune after Harrell's second solo without returning to the melody. It's a short tune at under 4 minutes. Track 3 is the title track, Alternate Summer. It's a lovely ballad with a building melody after a 4-measure intro. There's some interesting syncopations along the way and some light textured drumming from Cruz. Let's check it out. The melody here is 24 measures, but it's hard to tell where Harrell's improvisations actually begin. His lyrical ideas continue right through the whole piece, with Turner just adding soft backing phrases toward the end. Track 4 is Intermezzo. Stevens is in on sax for this one, and I don't envy him having to play this tricky melody line. I won't even try to analyze what's going on rhythmically here, but it works into more legato lines over interesting harmonies before Orchegwa is up first for a bass solo. Let's check that out. Vocetková keeps his bass solo nicely melodic. On this tune, Harrell's solo is very soft and has a vocal-like quality to it. And his improvisations continue to the end of the tune, getting down to the warm lower register with no return to the dangerous melody. Track 5 is called UV. Stephen stays on the sax for this one. Perdomo's on the Hammond B3, landing a gospel quality. The melody starts off as a waltz for 32 measures, but then the last 8 measure section changes up to 4 beats. Let's hear this one. Switch up to 4 beats there. The solos follow that same rhythmic switch up, and Stevens is up first, so let's hear his playing on this tune. Harrell and Arturo have solos here too, with some really smooth, fluid lines from Arturo's guitar. After getting back to the melody, they vamp around for Cruz to work up some excitement on the drums to final horn hits. Track 6 is Chalcedon. I guess that was a Greek colony, if I remember my history right.
So.
This one I would pick out as a Tom Harrell composition right away. There's an infectious rhythmic bass and piano ostinato figure, interesting modal changes, and a mysterious horn melody together with Stevens. After an 8-measure intro, the melody has 2 14-measure sections and a final 8-measure contrasting part before Harrell is up for a solo. Let's hear this tune. Harrell's solo lines expertly dissect the interesting chord changes on this tune, solving the puzzle melodically. Stevens gets a solo next, and let's hear Perdomo's acoustic piano solo on this tune. Melodic and rhythmic ideas there, and once more through the melody to end this one. Track 7, Heliotrope. And like a flower, this one is delicate and lovely, owing a lot to Altura's acoustic guitar on this track. No sax on this one. After an 8-measure intro, the 28-measure melody builds from rising lines, and it sounds like flugelhorn here. We'll get some of that melody in a 1-minute sample. After the melody, Harrell continues on for another round, improvising with great lyrical phrasing. Let's check out Altura's acoustic solo here, which starts out picking up Harrell's last lick. To the melody once more from there. Track 8 is Plateau. Maybe the name refers to the static, rather flat horn lines and insistent quarter note bass push that builds up tension over the first 36 measures of the melody, over the shifting harmonies. Harrell and Stevens reach the mountains with more climbing lines for a final 8-measure section. Harrell solos first here over very infectious ostinato bass lines from Orchestra. It's a pretty dreamy effect. Let's hear a little bit of that. Stevens follows with some nice intensity in his solo, and Perdomo builds exciting lines in an acoustic piano solo too. The horns are back for a different, more legato ending section into a final phrase with some drum energy from Cruz. Track 9 is Wind, and Turner returns for this tune. It's the longest on the recording at more than 12 minutes. It starts with an infectious rhythmic bass and piano ostinato idea in the 8-measure intro with tom beats from Cruz. The 16-measure horn melody has some harmonic tension and open intervals. Orchestra was up first for a bass solo after that. Let's hear the tune get started. There's a whole new, longer section of horn lines working into contrasting sections of syncopation and then rubato lines over drum fills before returning to the original melody idea and then just staccato rhythmic horn ideas that build up to a piano solo from Perdomo. Cruz and Orchestra really lay down a fat groove underneath. More new horn lines make an arranged transition to a solo from Turner. Let's hear the last line of the horns into the start of his solo. Horn lines lead to a drum solo from Cruz, and then an improvised solo from Harrell, and finally a composed horn line section to end it. This tune keeps surprising with new ideas through the whole composition. And the final track on the recording is Radius. This one is rhythmic with a kind of pedal tone bass and a mysterious modal horn melody. Harrell's just getting going there, and you know that those chords are going to inspire some interesting scales in his lines, so let's pop back in to hear a little bit more. Turner follows with a solo that keeps smooth connection through some interesting explorations, once more through the melody, and a rhythmic ending phrase wraps it up. So another great Tom Harrell recording for the collection. It continues in the vein that he's been pursuing in recent years, compelling original compositions that are harmonically complex, but easy to enjoy because of a variety of infectious rhythms conveyed by Oquegwo Cruz and Perdomo. Two pretty ballads break up the more rhythmic numbers in the program, and there are some surprises in the instrumentation, with Perdomo bringing in the Hammond organ for UV and Altura's acoustic guitar on heliotrope. Dana Stevens and Mark Turner have inspired solos throughout, and at 78, Tom Harrell's trumpet chops, creative composition ideas, and always lyrical and logical solos sound as great as ever. Don't miss this one.
Yeah, you know, I kind of picked up a bit of a theme on this too, because he calls it alternate summer, and I kind of felt like these tracks had sort of an outdoor summer elements type of theme with titles like plateau, wind, heliotrope, these, you know, flowers,
nature,
just nature, UV, okay, kind of
that's
light.
That's true too. I wonder how that fit in, but now it makes sense.
Yeah, tracks like Plateau feature single chords for long periods, so like the flatness of a plateau or something.
Yeah.
Wind has drifting chords, like in a kind of modal harmony, no resting place, you know, like the wind itself, and there's a grooving rhythm to it. I just kind of picked up these little sort of
it's interesting
evoking these elements from the compositions. I thought it was really clever if they're actually there. I heard them anyway. There's some imagination in the interpretation of all the titles on this album, some of which I'm sure I missed too. I mean, sounds like there's a lot in here. I'm always amazed at how much time like Harrell leaves himself between phrases. Like he's got this idea and he'll play it, and then there'll be a pause, and it's like he's contemplating the next phrase before he plays it.
Lots of space.
Lots of space, and also he kind of forms his solos into this sort of whole. He's one of those soloists who sees like this big picture, and he's trying to kind of, you know, fill it in. He's also really a tasteful, classy player.
Yeah.
He's got that soft, cushioned attack. Very creative playing too. The album's well produced, great clarity on the drums, and particularly the various cymbals. They were really very live, I thought, in the recording. I was especially attracted by the whole sound of the acoustic guitar played by Charles Altura. You even sampled that track. Yeah, his solo on heliotrope was really great. And the way he fit into Harrell's previous solo on that track too was really great. Everyone on the album plays with commitment, I think, to the concept too. And you could tell there's a focus. And this is a jazz album for thoughtful listeners like us.
Yeah.
And, of course, like adult music listeners, too. So I guess you shouldn't miss this one, adult music listeners.
Definitely, yeah. It satisfies on an intellectual level, but also lots of emotional feels, different rhythms.
When you say an intellectual level with music, that chases people away somehow. But it shouldn't, because the emotion is there, too. We get everything.
Get everything that will satisfy you over and over again. Those are the kind of recordings we like.
Indeed.
Well, it's been a long one, but we're at the end of episode 180 here.
We had a lot to say today.
And we've got our menu picked out for next week already for episode 181. So what's on the classical board, Mike?
Oh, man, you want me to say more? Oh, here we go. Anyway, we have we have a Baroque one next week. Marais works for bass viol by La Reveuse, and there are two bass viols in this, so this should be some interesting arrangements of these works. We've got more accordion. an accordion concerto by Eugen Zador, as well as some other works by him. He was a Hungarian composer who lived in the early to mid 20th century, let's say. And then the contemporary composer of next week is one that we've heard before on the podcast, Magnus Lindberg. He's Finnish, and we have his viola concerto, as well as some orchestral works on that.
Cool. On the jazz side, I've been leaning a lot towards American big releases in the past few episodes, so I'm going to spread out a little bit. We're going to hear Belgian bassist Piet Verbist on Origin Records with Flamenco Jazz Summit. El Mar Empieza Aquí. It sounds kind of intriguing, so we'll see what that's all about. We've got a debut recording from a German saxophonist, Lennart Alkemper, with one of our favorite pianists, Billy Test, along with him.
Yeah.
And I've got an Italian pianist, Domenico Sanna, on the Fresh Sound New Talent label with Music is the Answer. So we'll get a bit of variety in there for next week. If you want to check out those recordings, have them up on a playlist on Deezer a few hours after this episode is published. And there'll also be a link to it from our Facebook page. Before we sign out, we want to say thanks, as always, to Fast Science of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. I'm ready to start listening for next week. Any final words, Mike?
No, I think I've said enough for this week.
Yeah.
I put it all in the beginning.
All right. It's getting late at night, so time to refresh, and we'll start listening to some new music tomorrow, and I hope you will too. So that's all for episode 180, and we'll see you again next week for episode 181. So until then, keep listening.